Director Gibbes, so thank you all so much for coming this evening. This is actually our fourth Art of Healing program. Jeb Hallet, Dr. Jeb Hallet joined our board 2 years ago, and since his being on board, we have collaborated on these programs for 4 of the major exhibitions that Gibbes has put on over the last 2 years. It actually started with a show that we did of Jill Hooper's work. And in that exhibition, there was a marvelous piece that she produced of a woman named Susan who had a mastectomy. And it was a frontal image of her after her surgery. It was a very powerful work of art, and Jeb kept coming back to that piece and back to that piece and reading into it, particularly because of the way that the surgery was done. And out of that conversation that we started to have and other members of the staff, this concept of the art of healing evolved. We've done conversations like this for the Mary White exhibition that we had last year, and most recently the exhibition that we did with Jonathan Green and Richard Weidman's collection. So now we are very excited to be able to do it this evening with David Rawle, who is the collector of the works that we have on view, Spoleto Watercolors, and one of the 2 artists that are on display, Carl Palazzolo. And our doctors tonight, we now have MUSC joining the crowd, as well as Roper. We love to see all these doctors working together, particularly when it involves particle. And so Dr. Joseph Johnson is with us tonight, as well as Jeb Hallet. I have to make a few thank yous, particularly to Roper St. Francis for helping us to sponsor this programming. Gibbes, etc., our wonderful auxiliary group that helped to fund this exhibition. Blue Cross Blue Shield that generously funds our exhibitions every year. MUSC, South Carolina Bank and Trust, the Joanna Foundation, and the Albert Cicilli Foundation, and of course Spoleto Festival USA that graciously included this exhibition in their program. As a result, we have a great big sign in front of our building that will stay there through the duration of Spoleto. So thank you all for coming. Jeb will take it from here and begin our program.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
In respect of your time, we're going to spend an hour together in what I think you will find a very interesting conversation. Do we know where we're going to go? Yes and no. The concept behind talking about how art helps us live and heal really came from a single patient experience that I had, and I'm not violating HIPAA, but a very close friend of mine came to me with a very serious medical problem at Roper several years ago, Richard Morrill. And many of you know Ella Morrill, who was really the founder and perpetuator of Piccolo Spoleto. And Richard was very ill. Richard was an artist. And while Richard was in the rehab unit at Roper, I went up one day and he said, "Aren't the pictures on the wall terrible?" And I said, "Yeah, it's like the hospital food. It's terrible." And he said, "Do you mind if I bring my own art in and put it on the wall?" And I said, "Well, how much do you want to bring in?" He said, "Well, enough to fill all these walls." So I called the maintenance guy up, and we hung those walls complete with his art. And every day I went up to see him, he said it made him feel good. And after his recovery, he actually gave to Roper Hospital a very large painting, which now hangs at the end of the hallway in the 8th floor rehab. If you're ever over there, you will see it. And I think that is when I began to think we need to begin to connect in this community the concept of how we live, our wellness, our art, and our healing. And when I saw this exhibit, we spent some time together yesterday, and I'll come back to that. I thought, okay, in the last few weeks I had a fairly serious medical problem with an eye, and I'll talk a little bit about how when I saw this exhibit, several paintings in here, and one in particular here, how it really helped me sort of get into myself and get through what I had experienced. So from the dawn of civilization, humans have used icons to connect in a spiritual way to help you, if you think about it. Probably the most common icon we know in our society is the cross that has been held in front of so many people who are sick and dying. And all of us can think of icons or images that have been healing to us and our families. What we'd like to do tonight is we'll have a little bit of conversation here, which will begin about why did David and Carol decide to collect Carl and Stephen. And then I really would like for Carl to comment on what he and Stephen felt throughout their lives about the importance of art in the human life. So we'll begin here, and then we'll move into this room, and we're going to talk in this room about what Carl has done there, why he's done it, and you'll be able to interact and ask questions. Joe and I, as we go along, and Joe has some great insights into what's here, and I will be asking him for comments and insight. And we'll come back to this room, and then we'll come back in here to wrap it up. So we're going to do all of this in about the next hour. I'd like, how many of you are here for the first time? How many of you are veterans? So we sort of have a veteran group. Well, thank you for coming for the first time, and I hope you'll come again. We'll do more of these. How many of you know The Art Spirit by Robert Henry? A few of you do. This, in my life, has been one of the most important books that I read earlier in life about the connection between the human being and art and technique and what artists do. And I just want to begin this evening, and I'm going to end this evening with a very short quote from this, but I'm going to begin this evening with a short quote from this, and then I will move to David adding to why we have done this collection. So this is from The Art Spirit by Robert Henry. And if you wonder what kind of work he did, walk right through that gateway. On the right, there's a wonderful painting, The Green Fan, the girl or woman of Toledo, Spain. Fabulous. Hi, Jerry. Fabulous piece of art that Robert Henry did in the museum collection. This is what he said, the very first sentence of this wonderful book. Art, when really understood, is the province of every human being. It is simply a question of doing things, anything well. It is not an outside extra thing. When the artist is alive in any person, whatever his kind of work may be, he becomes an inventive, searching, daring, self-expressing creature. He becomes interesting to other people. He disturbs, upsets, enlightens, and he opens the way for better understanding. Where those who are not artists are trying to close the book, he opens it, shows there are still more pages possible. So with that opening, David, would you talk a little bit about why did you collect these two guys?
I'm very happy to be here because I get to look at these watercolors. I feel like I'm missing my children. I'm looking at three of Stephen's in there, and one is an oval image that is like a tantric image that he did a lot of, but it also was I think inspired by the moon that was out at that time, which was similar to the moon we had a few days ago that you also, and the one on the left has a little Buddha image and sort of in the clouds. And when Stephen painted that, he often left the paper out in the courtyard and after he'd done some background colors, and the rain came and sort of fuzzied it up, didn't face it at all, and it reminds me of that time. And I think when you think about collecting, typically we collect two kinds of things. We collect mementos, all of us have collected. souvenirs of a place we've been, or a person, or an experience. And then another kind of collecting is things that just resonate with you, that speak to you. Could be a stamp, could be a painting, could be a basket, could be, but that makes some connection to you. This work is both for us, for Carol and me, because it is work that we connect to, and it is memory for us of friendship and love that we have for the artist. It wasn't planned, and we didn't anticipate that it would have a cycle. To us, it was something that came out of the air and kept on going, and we hoped would go on forever. Carl and I have been close friends for a little over 30 years. We lived together with my last wife. It sounds like a passage. How many wives? Well, my previous wife, another wife, whatever. We'll lecture tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And so we lived in Maine and in New York together, and we became very close friends. And so I connect with Carl personally. I love this man. But I also happen to love his art. Now, it might not have worked out that way, but it did. And so for me, having his art was having something that I connected to, but also that had this other meaning to it. And then Carl would come here, then started coming to Spoleto, and Stephen started to come he was an older friend of Carl. I mean, Carl and he had been friends for a longer time. And then they started to make watercolors, and at the end of a time, they would, as a gesture of gratitude for being here, it was sort of like art camp, they would say, well, if you want to choose one. And so I would choose one, and then Carol just added so much to everything, and we would choose one together. And that's how we ended up with what you're seeing. And Jeb asked yesterday, were these our favorites, right? Well, at the moment. But every time I see something else that they've done, I think, well, gee, everything speaks to you differently in another way. So that's how it happened. It's very much a part of our lives. As Jeb suggested in the readings, it's work that takes us to a different place, as art does. It shows us the possibilities of life, as art does. It shows us how to see things differently, as art does. And I think the other thing is that it makes us optimistic about human beings. Human beings created this. We went to the Schubert Quintet the other day. A human being created that. He was 31 years old. It was a couple of months before he died at 31. I mean, doesn't that make you feel optimistic about what we have and who we are? So, for us, it's a huge part of our life, for which we are very grateful. We're very grateful to have you put this together, and I think the subject is fascinating. The Italian, the early Renaissance sculpture, much of it was commissioned for places of healing. I know everybody knows about the Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, where Fred Weisman was in a coma in 1966, and his wife brought in one of their Pollocks, and he came out of the coma. That's a Pollock. And as a result, they gave an extraordinary collection to that hospital, and you talk to the people there, and they say, well, I want to walk from here to there because I get to see something, or it takes me out of myself, which art does, thank goodness. And it has been an integral part of the healing process. But you don't have to be in a hospital to get healed or be well, and this is something that Jeb believes, and I agree with. So, I'm stopping now. Until my seminar on wives. best, let me just tell you right now.
David, I think this concept that we talked about yesterday, which is a little different than at the previous conversations, we sort of selected a few favorites, so to speak, and you may recall one that we talked. In our conversation yesterday, we found it's really important to do that for this evening. The concept that came from both of you, which Carl I'd like for you to talk about, and that is art shouldn't be something we just go to the museum to see. Art shouldn't be something that we just use when we're sick. That art is something that we live with. And obviously you have chosen it as your profession. But you talk about why in the world did you become an artist and how, yeah. Why in the world did you become an artist? What is the connection in your life that it's had to feeling good or to healing or?
Well, one of the things that David said that in terms of looking at art and taking this out of ourselves, unfortunately for an artist, it's just the opposite. So sometimes I feel like it's the most selfish activity because you're in a room all day with yourself, making these images that are totally born out of your psyche. And I always think it's a miracle that other people can take anything away from you, that they find anything to relate to. I think that's wonderful when I hear it, but I'm always amazed because it seems to me such an arcane activity and one that hasn't changed essentially since the 15th century, gesticulating on a blank canvas. But that being said, I will say that I know more artists who are octogenarians and older who you would say are not. You would say are much younger. And I can't help but believe that what we do for a livelihood is has a big effect on that observation. And furthermore, I think that the idea of walking into a room to look at a painting, to feel better or to feel larger, more expansive, is not the question. The question is how can we live our lives so that our surroundings have a very similar tonic. I don't think you can turn it on and off. I think you need to walk the walk. And we had a bit of a conversation about people surrounding themselves with beautiful things. And I'm not talking about massively important paintings and sculpture. I'm talking about buying yourself some flowers, painting the room a color that pleases you, being aware of your environment. And because I do believe it starts there. It really does start there. And I don't think you can spend your day going in and out of big box stores and parking in enormous parking lots and dealing with the onslaught that most of us deal with in our daily life, and then think that you can walk into the room and you're going to feel better, because you might for a while, but I think it needs to start in your lives. I think you need to train your life to be open to those experiences.
How did you and Steve meet, and why did this friendship occur? Were there similarities in what you were interested in, media?
No, absolutely. No, it was a meeting of minds. I mean, I think when you're in art school and you meet other people, generally you start to make friends with people who are like-minded. And generally, if you're an art student and you're young, you're reacting against something. You think you know it all, and you're reacting against something. And in our case, it was mid-60s, so it was the advent of minimalism. Minimalism was in the air. I think we were reacting against that. We were finding a way to put the gesture back into picture writing. And it was a technical thing, but it was an ideological thing. And I think a lot of the friends I made in art school, it was probably because we were like, And Stephen's case was maybe we stayed friends because the friendship was larger than that. And I think in terms of us working side by side when we were doing this work, I can't think of a lot of people I was able to do that with. It was just, we had this rhythm and this ease of being in that garden, working on this work. David and Carol would come home and the tickets for some of that. And it was like, it was the best artist residency you could imagine. And it was, and Stephen once said to me that making a watercolor is not like making a painting, that when we're living in New York, living in Manhattan, making a painting, all that angst that goes into making a painting is actually helpful. That rigor somehow translates in something that is beneficial to the painting. But with watercolors, it's an entirely different story. He said you have to feel like a little prince. And we sort of did, because all we had to think about was, what should we have for lunch? You know, I mean, there was nothing else. There was this kind of indolence and this languor that was helpful to making a watercolor. And of course, David and Carol provided that setting. I think it would be very different work if we weren't in this town and if we weren't in that garden. And during this period of time, it would be very different work.
You know, I was thinking before this event that Spoleto really is a multi-artistic event that is about wellness. Why do we go to Spoleto? To feel good, to lift our spirits, to be around all forms of art and conversation and drawing that somehow make us feel better and make us, I think, healthier in the way we live our life. So, Jerry, Dr. Reeves is here, who is the Dean of our medical school, and Joe, you and all your colleagues at the Medical University have created this wonderful new arts building that's Ashley River Towers, and in that are so many forms of art. And Joe, I mean, you and I are doctors. Why are doctors interested in art? And from where you are at the VA hospital and on the Medical University campus, would you reflect a little bit about how you think art plays any role, or what role it plays at the Medical University?
Good evening. It's so nice to be here and to be with these three illustrious people. We had so much fun with Carl yesterday. David allowing us to do this really is fantastic. I just want to say one thing before answering that, Jeb, about how unique we are in this setting. We hear mostly about artists fighting with each other. I mean, people would be at each other's necks, especially through the Impressionistic period, and fighting for space and recognition. And this is such a unique union of minds and spirits, and we get to see it in these two galleries tonight. So that is in itself somehow, I think, uplifting from a spiritual and health point of view. So we doctors, I think, are maybe the least able in the fray to see the joy in the art around us. And so I think we have to be pulled in a lot, and we can help, I think, once we're brought there. But there was a piece in JAMA a few months ago about the grieving of a physician, and we need the same art to lift us as with our patients. And I think the great opportunity, whether it's in an inpatient setting or an outpatient setting, is to have that mutual experience. That's one thing that the healing art really does, I think, in what we now think of a patient-centered universe, that with the patient in the center and bringing in art, we have all these other accoutrements around us in terms of social workers and pharmacists, psychologists. We're in a brand new age here. We espouse it at the VA. One other thing I'd say about the VA is there's a lot of art hanging, but there's one corridor in particular called the Hall of Heroes, and it's the photographs of primarily World War II veterans. Very, very large photographs along the lines that Dr. Greenberg had commissioned at ART, the ART, and it's, it really stuns you. One of the things that David said so profound tonight was he thought this would go on forever, and that translates into, well, we have it for tonight. We have this won't ever be like this again. So we all went forever, but we do have tonight. And that, I think, is one of the real messages in healing, that this art right now, for what it means to you as my patient, what it means to me, and how it can help us feel better and get prepared, because forever will never come.
Those of us who are... Yes, sir.
Did you set out to make money doing your art? I can't believe that.
I didn't know it was possible. I didn't know it was possible.
No artist has ever set out for the money.
Well, no, that's not true. Unfortunately, I do a lot of teaching, and the students, I did it was an honors program. I got to choose. It was 10 students, and they were so wildly ambitious. They knew the names of every curator, every gallery director. I was stunned. I mean, it was, and I had to, because I thought, well, when I was that age, I didn't even know that. Really, I thought, well, what am I going to do when I graduate? I mean, obviously, I'm not going to support myself in my art. Well, that was a lesson. But today, it's a whole different story. There's an ambition that is extraordinary, and we it works, and sometimes it doesn't. I had a young man who, very, very talented, and he said to me, we sat down, we were in the studio, and he said, here's what I'm going to do when I graduate. I'm going to graduate, I'm going to show the next gallery, I'm going to have a show. He had the whole life planned out, and I felt like I should have like a cigarette and a scotch and say, let me tell you about your life. But I thought, no, I couldn't do that. But you do think, art is a journey, and so put yourself in that wagon and just let it take you someplace. Don't try to direct the wagon, because it's really, it's not the way it works, in my opinion.
So Carl, my wife Linda and Austin and I, we have an 18-month-old grandson who we think maybe the next Picasso. We're not certain. He's done one piece of art with Linda. At what point in your youth were you attracted to doing something artistic?
Someone asked me that. The only reason I'm coming up with this is because someone had asked me that a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about memories. We realized that we can remember. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my father, and we had, just pencils, number 2 pencils and paper. And my mother had some carnations on the table, and he showed me how to draw a carnation. And he wasn't an artistic man. He was very talented. He built furniture, do electrical work. But I'm first generation. My father was from Sicily, my mother was from Abruzzi, and so there was that aspect of appreciating culture. And I remember that specifically sitting as a 5-year-old drawing this information. Now, if you say to me, is that where it came from? I'd be lying if I told you that if I could lay it all at the feet of that gesture. But it does stay with me. I think of that, and I think there was something for 5, you're with your father, you have his attention, and you're drawing a flower. I mean, that's...
Joe and I were sort of scientists of the human genome. We're probably a descendant of the Da Vinci. There has to be some course to it.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. Any other comments before we make our move?
I have one.
Yes.
I want to speak to the doctors. One question I have is how many doctors, maybe Richard Haggard is one, that use art and painting to release their emotions and for healing. One, I would ask the question of both of you, what do you do creatively? And the third thing I wanted to say, and not a question, is I feel that you are artists. You are artists in
the way you move, the way you deal with people. Surgeons are artists. I've known surgeons who go into sculpture, which makes sense because you're using your tools. And I just wondered how you feel, other than just looking at it and falling into the moment and falling into the scene or whatever emotion you have. How do you feel? If personally, you do anything creatively, how do you feel when you look at the art? Do you want to learn how to do it? I mean, actually do it because it will heal your grief and heal you in terms of your emotions when you're dealing with patients every day. Because this is a very traumatic experience sometimes. And that's all I can say.
Joe, I'll let you go first, and then I'll follow.
It's a lot.
In most of these hospital rooms now, there's at least one two-dimensional piece of art. And I usually will talk to my patient about it, because it doesn't matter exactly what it is. So that brings who they are to the fore. The other thing that I love to do is walk down the corridors in the VA with the medical students and stop. There's one particular painting, just a boat, or wrong colors, orange and green. Say to the medical student, why is that painting here? Whichever painting we happen to stop at, before we go in to see the patient. And then maybe after we go in to see the patient. So how does all that hang together? So that's the kind of the polemic of it. For me, my wife is a three-dimensional artist, so she's a potter. So it humbles me. So I know I'm not going to be able to do that. But I like to sing and play the guitar and write poetry and do those other things that bring humanities into medicine. So one of my goals here in our community is to bring the humanities into medicine. Of course, two-dimensional and three-dimensional, four-dimensional art plays such a huge role, and we're very lucky in Charleston to have had our medical leaders bring it right into the fore. The Ashley River Tower is an amazing place in so many ways, and we can do better though. We can do a lot better too. So working and striving and doing that.
I think your question is a very important one. And I thank you for acknowledging that physicians and surgeons live a life that there's an incredible amount of stress that we internalize because of the people we care. I've been interested in art since I was a child. That's why I asked. My father was an engineer, so I learned to draw. So I've always been in drawing. I really got intensely interested in it when I was about age 40. I was at the Mayo Clinic and I was burning out. I was operating night and day. And I would go to Maine, we had a family home in Maine, and I met a very capable artist there, John Gable. And John became a friend. And John is actually the one that gave me my first copy of the Art Spirit. And I got intensely interested in drawing, and I got intensely interested in the work of Winslow Homer. And I began to do watercolors. And I made a decision when I was 41, I was going to quit the Mayo Clinic and move to Maine and become an artist. My first wife said, that won't work. Maybe why she's my first wife. So I continued to use it. We can do another program. So I used art to really get my mind out of the stuff that was in there about patient care. And I think you may have mentioned, when you start drawing, any of you who do art, when you get into it, throwing a pot or writing, it's like everything else is gone. You are in the moment, and it is a feeling of peace that is hard to find anyplace else.
It's a meditation.
It's a meditation. And we're going to come back, we're going to talk in a minute in here about the type of meditation that Steve and you begin every morning with. So let's do this. Now, please let us go first. Yes, Jerry. Yes, Jerry.
Can you hear me? The question about what do we do for creativity? I'm retired, as I think Jeb said, and it came to me based on an early experience in my college that one of the things we could do at MUSC to improve the experience for us, the faculty, the students, but mainly the patients, is to have an augury. And so when you look out of a window, instead of looking at something hanging on the wall, to see something alive and beautiful. And that's been a creative gesture on my part to answer your question, what do we do? That's what I'm doing. And I think it's benefiting a lot of people.
That's a great comment. Thank you so much, Jerry. If you'll let us, yes.
But I did animations and drawing operation for it. So that the connection that I was going to put together, how I put it together, and then once I usually sign
You know, it's introductive reading. He and I know each other. I never knew he did operative drawings. When I was at the Master's General Hospital, my chief, Dr. Rawle, did a sketch of every operation before and after. I've done that now for 40 years. I've done over 10,000 operations. If any of you are interested in collecting any of these, Dr. Brady and I will sign them tonight. I have plenty of copies. Well, if you'll let us go first, because we want to get over this way, and I think we leave the mics here. We'll speak loudly in these rooms about the work that Carol and David did. It's really nice. I was looking at it. I was encouraged. We have a question.
Well, but you breezed over that part, because everyone should agree that the process of making large meditation. And I mean, I found it to be a lesson to ground very often, and I just wondered if you would speak to that.
Yeah, I think, that's a lovely concept. It's a really, and you hear it, I heard it in the school. Getting everyone, your hand is in one with the paper. And I think there are times when obviously you're in the zone. But more often than not, it's work. It's work, it's work. And it's not, particularly if you're doing it professionally, and say, I have a show in New York right now, and that's 3 years of work, because I work pretty slowly. The work takes a long time. So I know how much work I need. That's a very different exercise than just going into the studio and saying, I'm going to make a painting, and I'm going out in my life, or whatever it is. That doesn't involve going back to the studio and making another thing, and then making another thing. So I think keeping that kind of energy, that meditation is really possible when that's the order of the day. Having said that, I will say, going into Stephen's room for me, after he's done the work, absolutely, can I meditate? Absolutely. Can I get into that place? Absolutely. But was I in that place every time I made one of these? No, definitely not. So I know that's something that we strive for, and sometimes it happens, and sometimes it doesn't.
To your end result, does it make a difference to you when you bring it up?
Absolutely, absolutely. When I did some of, I worked half a year in Maine, and so I didn't see all the work I had done in one place. I should put it together. So I did it, and so when I walked through the gallery and saw it was a revelation to me to see all that work in one place. And yes, it was a moment where I thought, okay, this is good right now. But I don't always feel that. I'll walk into the collection that I'm in and look at some of it. I wish, that's just human nature.
Well, there's something interesting that Joe touched on about the collaboration. Carl's paintings that are in New York now, and there's a catalog of them out there. Many of them are painted on drop cloths from Stephen's studio. So it's just talk about that.
When Stephen was it was probably the last 2 weeks of his life, and there were a group of us, a group of friends who were in the hospital every day, and then when he went into palliative care, he had done a print edition the year before, and they had just arrived. There was an additional 500 prints, there was no way he was going to be able to sign his prints. And so he asked me if I would go and sign his prints. I can't believe I'm announcing this moment. So I said, of course, and he said, you can just initial them, because sometimes he's not just initial. So I went into the studio every morning, and I was seated at a table that was on top of his drop cloth. And I was pulling these prints out, listening to his music, looking around the studio, and it was almost unbearable. I mean, it was really signing these prints. But I kept looking down at these drop cloths, thinking, I can't let them throw these away. These are not to be dramatic, but really they can like shroud a terrain or something. And these stains of one's life. And so I asked from the estate for the drop cloths and they gave them to me, and I had them cleaned very carefully so as not to remove the paint stains, and mounted them on what I painted on top of. All paintings an emotionally charged activity, but these were particularly emotionally charged because
Oh, wonderful. We all promised hands up. When I first walked in this room, the eyes got my attention. And the reason they did, about 6 weeks ago, just unexpectedly, I started losing sight in my right eye due to a retinal vein problem. And you can imagine as a surgeon what that's like. And I remember it was about the time that Angela and I were talking about this, and you may remember I said to her, have you ever done an exhibit for the blind, because I thought I was headed in that direction. And it got me thinking about, why are there eyes in here? And I'm just going to ask you, why are there so many eyes in here? And what brings all of this together?
Well, that one and that one actually. I had done a group of paintings in the 90s, early 90s, and they were all based on the great Italian films of the 60s, which were very important. Rossellini, Fellini, and so these were almost notes for those paintings, and they represented a specific actress or actor or director. And someone asked me who that was, and I don't remember. But a lot of them had names on them, had actually wrote names. This one was actually done, we had seen that in the here, and I thought of all the other articles I had seen and wrote that. So those are specific. And then the eyes, my work has always been, if there's a leitmotif, I would say it's about memory and loss. The imagery changes through the years. I'm now one of those artists who you can walk into a room and say, you see a painting from 1980, and definitely say, well, that's my painting, because the imagery does change. But I use imagery that goes away and comes back. There's images that I used in the 70s that I thought I was done with in the pre-packaging work. And the eye has been one of those images. So it's part of my vocabulary, but it's not specifically what the work is about. It's not literal. The work is about memory. So anything to jog that conversation in the work, I'll use.
The Great Gatsby's back now. If you look at the original book code,
so the eye is not protected.
It's very honest.
These are specifically about being able to so that was never flawed. I was picking things left and right and then just extrapolating.
There's a little technical bit on this painting, and I don't know, Carl, this is what we call his conjugate vision, right? Your eyes always go right, a little bit divergent here, and you can see with the reflection that he's painted in there that he intended that. But moreover, we used to have a bird unit in Charleston. And I can remember many years walking in to that burn unit, and some of the patients that ended up leaving that were mummified in some way, where they had wrappings around them. And this painting says there's somebody behind this racket. And that's the healing part to me in this painting. That there's longing, there's maybe some dread, some regret, but also some optimism. And the eyes, in one sense, are so far away from this gray wrapping that you've given us, but yet they become the centerpiece of the things.
Again, as I was saying earlier, it's amazing to me that people can find things like that. I love it. But I go back, if I said, oh yes, that's exactly what I answered. But it's I love it yourself.
Next is gonna say mother and apple pie.
Right, but you know, I think anything that you can take from it that keeps you there is great. And I think it's to be commended.
Well, and
Other
if I,
questions or comments?
if I could just interject, because the thing that really appeals to me as a curator and as a museum person is the amazing quality of the pieces in the space. And to me, that's a credit to David and Carol, because obviously over the years they had the opportunity to select the works to be in part of their collection. And when I saw them hung, that Pam Wall, our curator, did so beautifully with Carl, it's such a gorgeous suite, because in the home they're all over the place. And yet when they're all together, they just speak to one another in such a way that I can't even describe it in words. Regardless of the imagery that you're using, Carl, they just all become sweet. And it's really, really gorgeous.
I had the same feeling when I saw them all together, because I had never seen them
together.
I've just seen them here and there in the house, and seeing all of Stevens and all of this. But what it did really is I thought, all right, there's one for each year, and that, so it made my whole interest in the passage of time concrete. And here I was looking at
20 years.
Yes, 20 years of my life, and that was obviously a profound moment. Yes, absolutely.
So let's do this. Look, we can all rotate going this way. So we can walk around and look. And you can rotate about what Stephen did in the morning when he got up at 5. And Carl, would you simply tell that story, because I think it brings us back to meditation and how we.
Stephen was a practicing Buddhist, and so he would get up, for me, at ungodly hours. I mean, he'd be up at 4:30 and meditating by 5, and then having the incense lit in the garden. And David tells a story about walking the dog, walking across the floor above the loggia, like at 8, and he could smell Stephen's incense, and he knew he was down there working already. So he had done 3 hours worth of work before I ever entered the room. But so many of the works, you'll see, are based on mandalas and tantric shapes. There are, particularly that one, the center, but there's many of them that have that center icon. This one's certainly clearly Eastern influence. And in fact, a few of them actually have the Buddha. There's that one, there's the Buddha shape in the lower left. There's one, the red, with the halo in this one. And I think that, I think that was the watercolor right here.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
So that was part of Stephen's life, the meditation, and that having been said, he would also set up his table with incense, he'd have the proper music playing, he'd have some flowers from the garden. It was an entire mise-en-scene there, so, which I benefited from, because I loved listening to music and smelling the incense. But clearly, the meditation was central to how he looked at his art and how he made it. Unfortunately, in his case, it wasn't strong enough to overcome what he needed in terms of his health. But this was what got him through, I think, clearly the last year of his life. And although he wasn't able to work, I would say the last 6 months, it was who he was as a person and who he was but spiritually is all right here. It's a very poignant example of who someone is being right there in front of you on the page. If I could say that about anyone, I could say that about Steve.
Carl, you've already talked about what you've done with the drop bombs. I was thinking earlier today, and I lost a friend my age, and mid friend of envy when we graded that last Saturday. And, when someone close to you dies like this, it has an effect on what you do the subsequent days, what you do in your work. What effect beyond the paintings that you've currently done did it have on your work and what may have come into your work in subsequent months or even up to now?
Well, actually my watercolors, Stephen's color palette tended to be a little brighter than mine, and he definitely influenced. I mean, we both were influenced by being here, this place, and definitely by working in proximity. And my palette definitely got brighter working around Steve. So I think there was that kind of osmosis. I just spoke with another artist about collective consciousness, which I am a big believer in. I think Jung got that right, and that definitely there's something out there that a group of people can. But I also think that being here, being in this climate, being in this environment, for an artist, I just can't imagine that any of it is bad. I just don't see the downside. Artists have talked to me about needing to leave New York, needing to find that kind of outlet. And I understand that professionally, but just in terms of being someplace where you can make good work, I can't imagine it.
Comments or questions from those of you who are looking at this and thinking about
I will make a comment again, and I
Yes.
apologize for interjecting myself, because I've lived in Charleston since 1981. Spoleto Festival started when, basically? 76, 77. Again, I go back to the collector, because it's fascinating to me that these objects now exist as a collection. Over the years of watching Spoleto, I have never seen a visual interpretation of this season in our yearly lives in Charleston until I saw this collection. And to me, it's truly a visual interpretation of the 2 weeks that we experienced in Spoleto. And that is what drew me, and I think our staff, to doing this exhibition. And I want to thank David for doing it, because you created it. You created this amazing opportunity for two artists to work here. And whether it was conscious or not, I mean, the best things usually are not conscious. But to have this visual record is really quite a phenomenon in this city. And I just want to say here.
Well, we're, it's sort of overwhelming to us, and it is the easiest thing in the world, because we all know how much people love visiting Charleston, and so this time of year in this place is like this extraordinary creative catalyst, not only for those who live here, but for those who visit. It's not just what's on the stage. That's just the tip of the iceberg. What it inspires in all of us here in visiting is extraordinary. So Stephen and Carl were beneficiaries of that, and we now of what they did as a result of it. But any of us can do this.
If you need artists, I have lists.
Because it's easy and it's fun, and I want to say also how much Carol added. Stephen, you don't know Stephen. Stephen was not the easiest person in the world, and he would, if we were, Carl and I were saying this when we came over here, he would have been on the sidewalk with us. I'm not doing that. No way I'm doing that. And so I was a little nervous, when 12 years ago, when Carol came into the mix, and I thought, it's going to overreact. I don't know what's going to happen. And he said, I feel like I've known her all my life. And everything was fine. But she added a whole new and better spirit to our group. And I tell you, in life, you get as good as you give. No question about it. And we've gotten a millionfold from this relationship and our little bit of opening the door. So if anybody wants to start Art Camp 202, we'd be happy to help facilitate that. But seeing them together is extraordinary for us.
Roberta had a knowing look on her face when you were describing Stephen, as Roberta would come over and visit with us very often, have some iced tea while we were working and chat and gossip. And so she got to know, obviously, Stephen very well.
I didn't see his difficult side.
He didn't like children. So the one picture of him is that picture out there, and there was a child there. So he was trying to avoid the child by working. So he was brilliant, and he was. He read amazing books that he inspired me to try to read. He had an extraordinary sense of color, as you can see. He was a great teacher, which is sometimes hard to believe when you heard how incommunicative he could be. But he was a great teacher, and he was a great friend. He was just a wonderful person. Idiosyncratic.
I can see a play developing here for the Dock Street, can't you? Comment, Joe?
Strange idea. I'm always more attracted to new ideas that come into my head quickly, but this one is, what struck me, what David said about Spoleto, and I have liked many more of these paintings than this one. But in the sense of healing, most of you know about this idea about receptors in the brain. Right? We have cocaine receptors, and we have marijuana receptors, and we have dopamine receptors, and we have some other ones. From many we haven't discovered yet. One of the antidotes, I think, to illness is in art is the color or the absolute uniqueness that hits some receptor. I don't think I've ever seen this color yellow in nature anywhere. Has anybody ever? It is not yellow. I mean, something to everybody else is yellow. And maybe one of the great attractions for healing is that one of those images hits just right, and it makes us like penicillin to pneumococci. You know, it just is a vine. You know, the way antibodies kill bacteria.
Well, we were talking about it. I would love to see, you know, and I know there's science about bringing dogs into homes.
They do it all the time.
And then you can literally drop your heart rate by cradling an animal. I would love to see people hooked up to machines in front of them.
We're actually doing some of that work now. But it's just, I just wanted to say thank you for what you give us in all these new experiences we have through your paints, and we get to do it over and over again.
There is such a thing as the psychology of color. But I don't know that you don't what I like about the work, both here and there, and I do see the relationship, it's so apparent, is that you're not consciously, I don't think, consciously putting what color where. It's coming from your spirit and your heart. And through history and the psychology of color, there are certain colors that do.
Yes.
In the old days, they used to have pink walls in prisons because it calmed guys down, but then pink became a female color. And it's fascinating. But yours, all these are very spontaneous, very ethereal. And I like the spontaneity of it. And it is coming from
something down under.
Absolutely.
As I said, the collective unconscious.
Linda Austin.
One of my colleagues and very dear friends is a guy named Bob Rynearson, is a psychiatrist and a sculptor. He eventually retired from psychiatry to be a full-time sculptor, but as a psychiatrist, he had a fascinating technique that he would do with patients. He would take a big piece of paper and he'd just make a squiggle. And then he would hand it to the patient and turn it 90 degrees, and the patient would make another squiggle, and then Bob would make the third, and the patient would make the fourth. And then he would have the patient make a drawing out of these abstract squiggles. And it was astounding what patients would reveal in these drawings. I did it once with a patient, and it was so overwhelming. It actually was a story of her brutalization as a child, and it was, I've never done it again. It was almost so overwhelming, but it was amazing to see how the unconscious would come out in these incredible drawings.
I know artists who have basic careers on far less than that.
So again, in respect of our time, let's go back to the center room, make a few final comments, and then we'll enjoy the rest of the evening.
With Carl and David's help and Pam Wall, our curator, and Roberta Sokolowitz, we produced what I think is a marvelous catalog that's available in our shop for this exhibition. And Carol is carrying one of the tote bags. Constant marketer, I can tell you that all are a great deal working with David and his marketing skills. It's been fabulous getting to do that with him. So, yeah, please.
So, thanks again for coming this evening. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to begin and end this evening with a short reading from Robert Hemingway's The Art Spirit. And this is the reading. Through art, mysterious bonds of understanding and of knowledge are established among men and women. They are the bonds of a great brotherhood or sisterhood. Those who are of the brotherhood or sisterhood know each other, and time and space cannot separate them. The brotherhood and sisterhood are powerful. They have many members. The members do not die. And that part of those members that is of the brotherhood or the sisterhood moves on. And I hope as we think about what we have seen tonight, as Joe said earlier, this is a moment in time. It will be different tomorrow, and it will be gone next year. But as Angela said, this is incredible for me, and I think for everyone here, an incredible union. I think someone mentioned union of the spirit of Spoleto. And Spoleto is a wellness, really is a wellness event. For those of you who like to read good books, it sounds like Stephen did. This is a fabulous book, and it's available in the bookstore here, and it's called The Age of Insight, The Quest to Understand the Unconscious in Art, Mind, and Brain, from Vienna 1900 to the present. And it's written by Eric Kandel, who won the Nobel Prize. And Eric Kandel recognized that about 10% of our brain is working and 90% is unconscious, and the 90% that's unconscious is trying to control that 10% that's misbehaving and trying to direct us. But this is a fabulous, fabulous book. If you're really interested in how a number of important individuals began to think about the unconscious and bring it into art, I highly recommend this particular book, The Age of Insight by Eric Kandel. And Angela and I hope that we can bring Eric here to visit with us and some evening share a conversation as we have tonight. Any final questions or comments to Carl or David or Joe? Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
The different imagery that you do, yours is definitely fed through the garden, but it's like a passageway into something in you that is bigger.
Well, hopefully, that's what we are all trying to do. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, no matter what your imagery is, whether you're a realist painter or a totally abstract painter, hopefully that's what we're all aiming for, that passageway right here. But thank you. I mean, that's...
Just, because you called it, you talk about language, but you can almost feel that, it's like you start out with an article, like A and B, and then there's a building, and the building of your imagery, and the building of Stephen's imagery, and the direction of the go.
Right.
I think it's just that part of the journey is just so interesting to have these two juxtaposed.
Yeah, and seeing them, as I said, finally, and not finally, but seeing them in the room the way they are is really pointed that out to me. Because you're just not aware of it as you're doing it a certain way, and seeing it in David's and Carol's home, it was piecemeal. So seeing it in this kind of environment brings that to the fore. Absolutely.
And it's about beauty.
Well, I know there's another term that you have to be very careful when you're talking about in an art school.
Yeah.
I once said to a student, you should try some watercolors, and I might as well have said to him, why don't you try knitting? He thought it was so antediluvian, and really, watercolor? I mean, so yes, it's really against the grain, because two topics that you have are hard sell. Those are beauty and any kind of thing having to do with technique or tradition. Those are very hard.
Any other comments? You want to stand up so they can hear? So people get your comments, wonderful, back people can hear.
Wonderful it is, but I'm so taken with the idea that this man was so much a part of your life. He left such an amazing impression, and that your work continues to be a tribute to him. I mean, just looking at the works you have for sale now in New York, and I said to you, what's with the perfume bottles?
Well, the perfume bottles that are in the catalog,
Right.
that one asked me about, where Stephen was a complete scent for keep a one whiff of the scent over and tell you what it was, what the compound was. And for someone who was a smoker, I found that amazing. How do you smell anything? But he could. Just was, so I did this series of 12-inch things that were various fragrances that he was really enjoying or gave him, and they were just little homages. And anyone who knew Stephen, all these artists who knew Stephen, they all got the perfume and one of the scents.
Did he know before he passed away how amazing he was to all of you? And it's just that it carries that way.
I don't know who roll around and speak friends, but I don't know. But I think everybody must have. I always thought people had someone in their life like friendship.
They're going to be, they're going to tell crazy stories probably, but they're not going to maybe. It just fascinates me that he has such
Well, there are those people in my life. There are those people, and not all of them are artists, but David and Carol have an enormous influence. So one likes to think that it's a way of keeping the spirit alive.
When Stephen was dying, it was hard to talk to him about, sort of. I felt about him right now like that. He had an article that had been in the Times about things that people who are dying don't want to hear. All the phrases. And so he would just hand it to you. And so it limited the conversation. You're in my thoughts or whatever.
So let's end on a note that life is short, and what we do is arduous, but that art really is so important in our wellness and in the way we heal and deal with the difficulties of life. And I thank you all for staying a little extra time. I want to thank Leslie Stever for all the help that she gave us. Please thank all of your staff, Rudy, the whole crowd who are here tonight helping us. And this Art of Healing program is going to continue to grow. And if any of you in any way want to help support these programs, please talk with Angela. We really want this to go forward. We want it to grow. We see many dimensions. We see many other opportunities in it. And we feel it's going to be an important part of this community for a long time forward. And we hope every year in Spoleto that we can do something as great as this has been. So Carl and David and Joe, thank you so much.